I overheard my son's wife whisper, "Once she's gone, we get everything." They laughed like wolves celebrating before the kill. That night, I couldn't sleep. At 2 a.m., I called my lawyer. Next morning, my son found an envelope on the table. When he read who gets everything, his face turned white as death itself. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. My name is Margaret Thompson, and at 72 years old, I thought I'd seen everything life could throw at a person. I was wrong. The betrayal that would shatter my world came from the last place I expected. The son I'd given everything to protect and nurture. But let me tell you who I was before that horrible night, so you understand exactly what they tried to destroy. I raised 3 children alone after my husband Daniel died in a construction accident 38 years ago. Thomas was only 15 then, his sisters Sarah and Linda even younger. The insurance money barely covered the funeral. I remember standing at Daniel's grave, promising him I'd keep our family together no matter what it took. And God knows, it took everything I had. For 20 years, I worked 2 jobs, days at the grocery store, nights cleaning office buildings. My hands became rough from bleach and scrubbing. My back ached constantly, but I never complained, not once. When Thomas got accepted to medical school, I took on a 3rd weekend job. My friends thought I was crazy. Let him take loans, they said. But I wanted to give my children what Daniel and I had dreamed of, a chance at something better. Thomas was my golden child, not because I loved him more, but because he seemed to need me most. He'd cry in my arms after his father died, promising he'd become a doctor and take care of me forever. "You'll never have to work again, Mom," he'd say, his young eyes so earnest and full of love. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was my son. The house where this story unfolds is the same one Daniel and I bought as newlyweds. Nothing fancy. A 2-story colonial with creaky floors and windows that stick when it rains. But every room holds memories. The kitchen where I taught my children to make their grandmother's apple pie. The living room where we gathered every Christmas, even after the kids grew up and started their own families. The garden where Daniel proposed to me again on our 10th anniversary, saying he'd choose me all over again. After retirement, I filled my days with simple pleasures. Every morning, I'd sit on the front porch with my tea, watching the cardinals that nested in our oak tree. I volunteered at the church food pantry on Tuesdays, delivered meals to shut-ins on Thursdays. The neighborhood kids called me Grandma Maggie, and I always had fresh cookies waiting when they visited. 3 months before that terrible night, my doctor found something concerning during a routine checkup, an irregular heartbeat, he called it. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but something to monitor. I didn't tell anyone. Didn't want to worry my children or become a burden. That word would come back to haunt me. Burden. Is that what a mother becomes when her usefulness expires? Looking back, I should have seen the signs. The way Jessica's eyes lingered on my mother's pearl necklace. How Thomas kept mentioning that the house was too big for one person. The sudden interest in my health, my finances, my daily routine. But when you love someone, you explain away the red flags. You tell yourself you're being paranoid, that surely your own flesh and blood could never see you as anything other than the woman who loved them more than life itself. I was about to learn that sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes the child you sacrificed everything for grows up to be someone capable of the unthinkable. Life before that night had a rhythm to it, like a familiar song you've heard so many times you could hum it in your sleep. My days started at 6:30 sharp. No alarm clock needed. After 40 years of early shifts, my body knew when to wake. I'd make my way downstairs, careful on the 3rd step that always creaked, and put the kettle on for tea. Earl Grey with 1 sugar and a splash of milk. The same way Daniel used to make it for me every morning. The kitchen window faced east, and I loved watching the sunrise paint the sky different shades of pink and gold. Those quiet moments before the world woke up felt sacred. I'd sit at the same spot at the kitchen table, where I'd helped Thomas with his homework all those years ago. Sometimes I could still see the faint marks where he'd pressed too hard with his pencil, frustrated with algebra. Now he was Dr. Thomas Thompson, head of cardiology at Memorial Hospital. The irony of that wouldn't hit me until later. Sundays were special. They always had been, even during the hardest years. Every Sunday at 4 o'clock, Thomas would arrive with Jessica and their 3 children. Emma, 12, Michael, 10, and little Sophie, just turned 7. The house would suddenly fill with noise and life. Sophie always ran straight to me, arms outstretched, calling Grandma Maggie, in that sweet voice that could melt any heart. Michael would head immediately to the cookie jar, knowing I'd baked his favorite chocolate chip cookies that morning. Emma, trying so hard to be grown up, would kiss my cheek politely before asking if she could help set the table. I'd spend all Sunday morning preparing their favorite meal: pot roast with carrots and potatoes, green beans from my garden, homemade rolls that filled the house with the smell of yeast and butter. Jessica would compliment the food, though she rarely ate much, always claiming she was watching her figure. Thomas would pat his stomach and joke that his mother's cooking was the reason he had to spend extra time at the gym. The dining room would glow in the afternoon light, and I'd look around that table at my family, feeling rich in ways that had nothing to do with money. Thomas would tell stories from the hospital, carefully edited for young ears. Jessica would talk about her work at the interior design firm, occasionally dropping hints about how the house could use updating. "Just some new curtains, Margaret," she'd say. "Nothing major." After dinner, while Jessica helped clear the table, or pretended to while mostly supervising the children, Thomas and I would sit on the porch. These were my favorite moments, just the 2 of us, like when he was young and would tell me about his dreams. He'd ask about my week, my health, if I needed anything. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I'd always say. "Just having you here is enough." The grandchildren would play in the backyard where their father once played, where the old swing Daniel built still hung from the oak tree. I'd watch them through the window, seeing echoes of Thomas in Michael's determined expression, glimpses of my younger self in Emma's careful way of organizing their games. Sophie had Daniel's eyes, bright blue and full of mischief. Weekdays had their own comfortable routine. Monday was laundry day. Tuesday, volunteering at church. Wednesday, book club with the ladies I'd known for 30 years. Thursday, grocery shopping and visiting Mrs. Chen next door, who was recovering from hip surgery. Friday, I'd tend my roses, the pride of the neighborhood. Saturday was for baking and preparing for Sunday's dinner. In the evenings, I'd work on my quilts, one for each grandchild, for when they got married. I'd already finished Emma's, a garden pattern in soft blues and greens. While I sewed, I'd think about their futures, imagining weddings and great-grandchildren, more Sunday dinners, stretching into the years ahead. It was a good life, a blessed life. I went to bed each night grateful for everything I had. I should have known that when life feels too perfect, too peaceful, that's usually when the storm is gathering just beyond the horizon. The first crack in my perfect world appeared on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in early September. I was deadheading roses in the front garden when Jessica's white Mercedes pulled into the driveway. Strange, I thought, wiping the dirt from my hands. Jessica never visited during the week, and certainly never without Thomas. "Margaret!" she called out, her smile a bit too bright, like fresh paint covering old wood. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by. "How are you feeling today?" That question, "How are you feeling?" would become a constant refrain over the next few weeks. Not "how are you," but specifically, "how are you feeling?" as if she was checking symptoms off a list. "I'm fine, dear," I said, leading her inside. "Would you like some iced tea?" She followed me to the kitchen, her eyes scanning the room in a way that made me uncomfortable, like she was taking inventory. While I poured the tea, she peppered me with questions. "Have you been to the doctor lately? Taking all your medications? Any dizzy spells or shortness of breath?" "Jessica, I'm perfectly healthy," I assured her, though something cold settled in my stomach. Is everything all right? Of course. Her laugh was brittle. Thomas just worries about you being here all alone. We both do. She stayed for exactly 15 minutes, barely touching her tea, then left as suddenly as she'd arrived. But not before I caught her peeking into the dining room, her gaze lingering on my mother's china cabinet and the silver tea set that had been Daniel's grandmother's. 2 days later, Thomas called during his lunch break, something he never did. "Mom, Jessica mentioned you seemed tired when she visited. Maybe you should see Dr. Morrison for a checkup." "I wasn't tired at all," I said, confused. "I was gardening when she arrived." A pause. "Well, she said you seemed confused. Forgot you'd invited her over." "Thomas, I didn't invite her. She just stopped by." Another pause, longer this time. "Okay, Mom, just take care of yourself, all right?" That weekend, during Sunday dinner, I noticed more strange behavior. Thomas kept steering the conversation toward my daily routine. "So, you're still driving yourself to church? Managing the grocery shopping alone? Keeping track of all your medications?" "Of course I am," I said, growing irritated. "I'm 72, not 102. Jessica and Thomas exchanged a look. Quick, but I caught it. The kind of look parents share when they think their child isn't paying attention. Except I wasn't the child here, was I? The following week brought more oddities. I found Thomas in my study when I came back from the bathroom. "Looking for stamps," he said, though the stamps were clearly visible on my desk. Later, I discovered some papers had been moved. Bank statements, the deed to the house, my will. All still there, but not quite where I'd left them. Then there was the day I came home from book club to find Jessica's car parked outside, but no one answering the door. When Thomas arrived 10 minutes later with Jessica, they claimed they'd just gotten there. But I knew Jessica's car had been there for at least 20 minutes. And was that a house key I saw her slip into her purse? The questions intensified. "Mom, have you thought about what you'd do if you fell and couldn't get to the phone?" Thomas asked one evening. "These old houses with all the stairs. Maybe you should consider something smaller, one level, easier to maintain." "This is my home," I said firmly. "Your father and I built our life here." "I know, but the answer is no, Thomas." He backed off, but I saw that look again between him and Jessica. Frustrated, calculating, like chess players whose opening move had been blocked. That night, after they left, I stood in my kitchen and felt, for the first time in my own home, afraid. Not of strangers or intruders, but of something much worse. The growing certainty that the danger was coming from inside my own family. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in Daniel's old armchair, the one I'd never had the heart to throw away, and tried to make sense of what I was feeling. The house creaked and settled around me. Familiar sounds that usually brought comfort, but now seemed to whisper warnings. By 3 in the morning, I'd convinced myself I was being ridiculous. This was Thomas, I told myself. My Thomas. The boy who'd brought me dandelions every Mother's Day until he was 16, insisting they were prettier than roses because they were sunshine-colored. The teenager who'd held my hand at Daniel's funeral, promising he'd never leave me. The young man who'd called me crying with joy when he got into medical school, saying none of it would have been possible without me. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and pulled out our family photo albums. There was Thomas at 5, missing his 2 front teeth, grinning on Christmas morning. Thomas at his high school graduation, valedictorian, his eyes shining with promise. His wedding day dancing with me to "What a Wonderful World," whispering, "Thank you for everything, Mom." How could I suspect him of anything sinister? What kind of mother thinks such horrible thoughts about her own son? By morning, I'd rationalized everything. Jessica stopping by unexpectedly. She was probably shopping nearby. There was that new boutique on Maple Street. The questions about my health? Natural concern for an aging parent. Thomas looking through my papers? Maybe he really was looking for stamps. And even if he'd glanced at financial documents, wasn't that responsible? Making sure I had everything in order? I was at the grocery store that Thursday when I ran into Patricia Williams, my friend since our children were in elementary school together. "Margaret, you look tired," she said, studying my face with concern. "Just haven't been sleeping well," I admitted. "Silly worries." "About what?" I almost told her. The words were right there on my tongue. But how could I say them out loud? How could I tell someone that I suspected my son and his wife were— What? What exactly did I suspect? It sounded paranoid even in my own head. "Just old age, I suppose," I said instead. "You know how it is." Patricia squeezed my hand. "If you ever need to talk, I'm here." That Sunday, I watched Thomas and Jessica extra carefully during dinner, looking for proof that I was wrong, and I found it, or thought I did. Thomas helped clear the table without being asked. Jessica complimented my new haircut, which she'd never done before. They were being kind, attentive. Maybe they'd sensed my distance and were trying harder. When Sophie climbed into my lap after dinner, begging for a story, Jessica didn't rush. Her away like usual. "Take your time," she said with a smile. "We're in no hurry." "See?" I told myself. "You're being paranoid. This is what happens when you live alone too long. You start imagining things, creating drama where none exists." Thomas found me in the kitchen later, drying dishes. "Mom, you seem quiet tonight. Everything okay?" I looked at my son, really looked at him. He had his father's strong jaw, my eyes. There was concern in those eyes now, what looked like genuine worry. How could I doubt him? "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a little tired." He hugged me then, and I breathed in his familiar scent. The same cologne he'd worn since college, mixed with hospital antiseptic. "I worry about you," he said into my hair. "You'd tell me if something was wrong, wouldn't you?" "Of course," I lied, hugging him back. That night, I threw away the notebook where I'd started writing down the strange incidents. I was being foolish, letting loneliness and age turn me suspicious of the people who loved me most. Thomas was a good son. Jessica was just Jessica. High-strung, perhaps a bit materialistic, but not malicious. I took a sleeping pill and went to bed, determined to stop this nonsense. I even said a prayer, asking for forgiveness for doubting my family. I should have trusted my instincts instead. The universe has a way of revealing truth, whether you're ready for it or not. My moment came on a Thursday afternoon in late September, 2 weeks after I'd thrown away that notebook. I was looking for my reading glasses. I had 3 pairs but could never find one when I needed it, and decided to check the guest bedroom where Jessica sometimes left her things during visits. The room still smelled faintly of her perfume from Sunday's dinner. Her oversized purse sat on the chair by the window, the one she'd forgotten and called about, saying she'd pick it up this weekend. I hesitated at the doorway. Going through someone's purse felt wrong, like crossing an invisible line of trust. But my glasses might have fallen in when I'd helped her carry things upstairs. I opened the purse carefully, just wanting to peek inside. No glasses. But as I started to close it, I saw the corner of familiar green paper. Bank statements. My bank statements. My hands trembled as I pulled them out. 3 months' worth, all from my primary checking account. But these weren't copies I'd given them. I never had. These were the originals that had gone missing from my study, the ones I'd convinced myself I'd simply misplaced. Yellow highlighter marked several entries: my Social Security deposits, the quarterly dividend payments from Daniel's life insurance investment, the pension from my 20 years at the grocery store. Someone had done the math in the margins. Monthly income, $3,847. Annual, $46,164. Below that, in Jessica's handwriting, house value, $487,000. Savings estimate, $200,000 plus. Total estate, $700,000. Minimum. $700,000. Is that what my life had been reduced to? A number on a piece of paper? There was more. A business card for Sunset Manor Assisted Living fell out, with an appointment scheduled for the following Monday at 2 p.m. On the back, someone had written, "Basic care, $3,200 month. Memory Care Unit 4800 month. Medicare covers partial after 90 days documented cognitive decline. Documented cognitive decline. The words hit me like ice water. That's why Jessica kept asking about confusion, why Thomas insisted I seemed forgetful. They weren't concerned, they were building a case. My legs gave out and I sank onto the bed. The room spun around me, but not from any medical condition. This was the vertigo of betrayal, the dizziness that comes when your world tilts off its axis. I heard a car in the driveway and panicked. Working quickly, I photographed everything with my phone. Patricia's son had taught me how to do that last year. I put everything back exactly as I'd found it, my fingers shaking so badly I nearly dropped the bank statements. It was just the mailman, but the scare sent me to the bathroom where I lost my lunch. I sat on the cold tile floor afterward, my back against the bathtub, trying to process what I'd discovered. They were planning to put me in a home, the cheapest one they could find by the looks of it. Sunset Manor. I knew that place. It was where Harold Murphy had died last year, alone and confused, his family visiting once a month if he was lucky. The local news had done an exposé on their violations, understaffing, patients left in soiled clothes, medications mixed up or forgotten. But it was the calculation that hurt most. My son, who I'd held as he took his first breath, had reduced me to a mathematical equation. Income minus expenses equals profit, nothing more. I stood up slowly, gripping the sink for support, and faced myself in the mirror. The woman looking back at me seemed older than this morning, aged by knowledge rather than time. But there was something else in her eyes now, a spark of anger beginning to burn through the shock. They'd made one crucial mistake in their planning. They'd assumed I was already weak, already declining. They'd counted their inheritance before I was gone. But I wasn't gone yet. Not by a long shot. That evening, I called Thomas and told him I had a stomach bug, too sick for Sunday dinner this week. "Maybe you should see a doctor," he said, concern thick in his voice. False concern, I now knew. "I'll be fine," I said. "Just need rest." What I really needed was time. Time to think. Time to plan. Time to figure out how to protect myself from the people I'd never imagined I'd need protection from. Saturday night arrived with an unseasonable chill that seemed fitting for what was to come. I'd spent 2 days pretending to be sick, buying myself time to think, but Thomas had insisted on coming over, despite my protests. "Just to check on you, Mom. Jessica's worried sick." The irony of that phrase wasn't lost on me. They arrived at 8:30 with Chinese takeout, though I'd told them I couldn't keep anything down. The smell of General Tso's chicken, once my favorite, now made my stomach turn for entirely different reasons. I stayed upstairs, calling down that I was too weak to join them, listening as they made themselves at home in my kitchen. Around 10 o'clock, desperate for water but not wanting to face them, I crept toward the stairs. Their voices drifted up from the kitchen, and something in Jessica's tone made me freeze. I sat down on the top step, hidden in the darkness of the hallway, my heart pounding so loud I was sure they'd hear it. "She's getting worse," Jessica was saying. "Did you see how she couldn't even come downstairs? This is perfect timing." "Keep your voice down," Thomas warned. "She can't hear us. She's probably already asleep. Old people in their early bedtimes." Old people. Like I was a category, not a person. "The appointment at Sunset Manor is Monday," Jessica continued. "I told them we're concerned about early-stage dementia. If we can get her doctor to agree, she needs full-time care." "He won't," Thomas interrupted. "Morrison's known her for 20 years. He says she's sharp as a tack." "Then we find another doctor. Pay for a second opinion. Hell, a third if we need it. Thomas, we need this. You know we need this. The gambling debts." "Don't." His voice was sharp. "That's over. I told you, I'm done with all that." Jessica laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Done? You're in for $300,000. Those people don't just let you be done. They want their money by Christmas, or did you forget what happened to David Chen when he couldn't pay?" My hand flew to my mouth. Gambling debts? My Thomas? Once she's gone, we get everything, Jessica said, her voice dropping to that whisper I'd replay in my nightmares. The house alone will cover the debts. Her savings can finally get us that place in the Hamptons, the kids' college funds, everything we've been waiting for. They laughed then. Actually laughed. Not with joy, but with the dark satisfaction of conspirators who think they've already won. We just need to speed things up, Jessica continued. Her medications, if we adjust the dosages just a little, she'll seem confused, disoriented. Classic dementia symptoms. We can't. Thomas's voice wavered, and for a moment I thought maybe there was still some piece of my son left in there. We're not hurting her, Jessica said smoothly. We're helping her. She shouldn't be alone in this big house anyway. It's dangerous. What if she falls? What if she forgets to turn off the stove? We're being responsible children, making the hard decision for her own good. Right. For her own good. Thomas's voice was flat, unconvinced, but compliant. Besides, Jessica added, it's not like she'll know the difference once she's in the memory unit. A few months of confusion and then, well, at her age, with her heart condition, nature takes its course. These places aren't exactly known for their longevity rates. The memory unit, where patients with advanced dementia spent their final days, forgotten and confused, unable to advocate for themselves or even remember their own names. They weren't just planning to steal my money. They were planning to steal my mind first, then wait for my body to follow. She won't last 6 months in that place, Thomas said quietly. Exactly. Quick, peaceful, natural, and then everything transfers to us. Clean and simple. I pressed my fist against my mouth to stifle a sob. My son, my beautiful boy who'd cried when our cat died, who'd written me Mother's Day poems every year until high school, was discussing my death like a business transaction. What about Sarah and Linda? Thomas asked, mentioning his sisters for the first time. What about them? They haven't visited in 2 years. We're the ones taking care of her. We deserve this. Taking care of me, is that what Sunday dinners had become? An investment in my death? I heard chairs scraping, them getting ready to leave. I scrambled back to my bedroom, diving under the covers just as footsteps climbed the stairs. My door cracked open. Mom? Thomas's voice soft and concerned. The perfect performance. I kept my breathing deep and even, feigning sleep. He stood there for a long moment, and I wondered what he was thinking. Was there any guilt? Any second thoughts? Or was he calculating how much longer he'd have to wait? The door closed. I heard them leave, their car pulling away into the night. Only then did I let myself cry, deep body-shaking sobs into my pillow. The kind of crying I hadn't done since Daniel's funeral. But these tears were different. This wasn't grief for someone gone. This was grief for someone who'd never existed. The son I thought I'd raised. The next morning, Sunday, I forced myself to act normally despite feeling like my world had shattered. I needed to know the full extent of their plan. If Thomas had gambling debts of $300,000, dear God, how had it gotten that bad? Then this was about more than just greed. This was desperation, and desperate people do terrible things. I called in a favor from Patricia's son, Marcus, who worked in IT. I think someone's been in my computer, I told him. Could you check it for me? He came over that afternoon while Thomas and Jessica were at their country club brunch, their Sunday routine when they skipped dinner with me. Marcus found it all. A keylogger installed 3 months ago, tracking every password, every email, every website I visited. They had access to everything, my banking, my medical portal, even my Facebook where I messaged with my daughters. Mrs. Thompson, Marcus said gently, whoever did this has been monitoring you for months. This is serious. Can you remove it without them knowing? I can do better. I can make it show them what you want them to see. He set up something he called a mirror program. They'd see fake activity while my real computer use stayed private. Smart boy. I made sure to pay him in cash they couldn't track. After Marcus left, I did something I'd never done before. I searched Thomas's name online with the word gambling. What I found made me sick. Photos from casino websites, high-stakes poker games, a newspaper mention from 2 years ago about a police raid on an illegal gambling ring where several prominent local professionals were questioned, though no names were published. The timeline matched when Thomas had suddenly needed a loan for home repairs that I'd given him without question. Then I checked the medicine cabinet with new eyes. My heart medication, the one that sometimes made me dizzy. The pills looked different. Slightly smaller, a different shade of white. I'd assumed it was just a generic brand change. But what if it wasn't? What if they'd already started their plan? I drove to CVS and asked the pharmacist to verify my medications. "Just want to make sure I have the right doses," I said casually. He scanned them, frowned, scanned again. "Mrs. Thompson, these aren't your prescribed medications. These are similar looking, but this one is actually a mild sedative. And this is a blood pressure medication, but at 3 times your prescribed dose. Where did you get these?" "I must have mixed them up with a friend's," I lied, my mind racing. 3 times the dose. That would cause confusion, dizziness, symptoms that look like dementia. They weren't just planning to poison me. They'd already started. I filled my proper prescriptions and hid them in an old tea tin in the pantry, leaving the tampered bottles in the medicine cabinet so they wouldn't know I'd caught on. Then I went home and searched the house systematically, like a detective at a crime scene. In the basement behind Daniel's old tool chest, I found a folder, legal documents, some signed, some still blank, power of attorney forms with my signature, forged but convincingly, papers for the sale of the house to a developer who'd been buying up the neighborhood. The contract was dated for 3 months from now. They'd already been negotiating the sale of my home while I was still living in it. There was also a life insurance policy I'd never seen before, taken out 2 years ago, with Thomas as the sole beneficiary. $500,000. The premium payments came from an account I didn't recognize, but my social security number was all over it. Identity theft by my own son. At the bottom of the folder was a brochure for a funeral home, certain packages circled. They'd already picked out my casket, the cheapest one, naturally. Wouldn't want to waste money on the dead when there were gambling debts to pay. But the worst discovery came when I checked my email using Marcus's secure connection. Hidden in the deleted folder were exchanges between Thomas and someone named Vincent Caruso. The messages were carefully worded, but the threat was clear. Pay by December 31st or face consequences. One email contained a photo of my grandchildren at their school playground. The message underneath simply said, "Beautiful family. Shame if anything happened." My God. The gambling debts weren't just about money. Thomas had put all of us in danger. My grandchildren, those innocent babies, were being threatened because of their father's addiction. And his solution? Murder me for money. Not even a clean murder, but a slow, cruel descent into manufactured madness. I sat at my kitchen table as the sun set, surrounded by evidence of a conspiracy that went deeper than simple greed. This was about survival, Thomas's survival at the cost of my life. That night, I locked myself in my bedroom and fell apart completely. Not the gentle crying of earlier, but something primal and devastating that came from the deepest part of a mother's soul. I stuffed a towel under the door so no sound would escape if Thomas had planted listening devices, then collapsed onto the floor beside my bed, my body shaking with sobs that felt like they might tear me in half. I crawled to my closet and pulled out the box I kept on the top shelf. Thomas's baby things, the tiny hospital bracelet from his birth, his first tooth wrapped in tissue paper, the Mother's Day card he'd made in kindergarten with his handprint in yellow paint. "I love you this much, Mommy." The word "Mommy" broke something inside me, and I screamed into his baby blanket until my throat was raw. How had that sweet baby become a man capable of this? Where had I gone wrong? I remembered the night he was born, how the nurse had placed him on my chest, still slippery and crying. Daniel had wept openly, not caring who saw. He's perfect, Maggie. Our boy is perfect. I'd counted his fingers and toes, marveling at how something so small could contain so much possibility. I'd whispered promises to him that night that I'd always protect him, always love him, always be there. The memories came flooding back in painful waves, teaching him to ride a bike in this very driveway, running behind him shouting, "I've got you, I won't let you fall." His fever when he was 7 that spiked so high I'd sat in a cold bathtub with him all night, praying to God to take me instead if someone had to go. The science fair project we'd built together, a volcano that had exploded too enthusiastically and covered the gymnasium ceiling with papier-mâché lava. When had he stopped being that boy? Was it when Daniel died? I'd been so focused on survival, on working to keep us afloat, that maybe I'd missed the signs. Had I worked too much? Loved too hard, not enough? The questions tortured me as I rocked back and forth on my bedroom floor. I pulled out our photo albums, turning pages through the years, searching for the moment it all went wrong. Here was Thomas at 10, grinning with his Little League trophy. At 15, dancing with me at his cousin's wedding. At 22, graduation day, tears in his eyes as he dedicated his degree to me. At 30, holding newborn Emma, looking at her with such tenderness. That man in the photos, was he ever real? Or had I only seen what I wanted to see? The cruelest memories were the recent ones. Just last month, Thomas had fixed my leaky faucet, refusing to let me call a plumber. "That's what sons are for, Mom," he'd said, kissing my cheek when he finished. 2 weeks ago, he'd brought me roses for no reason, saying he'd seen them and thought of me. Were those gestures of love or guilt? Was any of it real? I found myself in Daniel's chair at 3 in the morning, clutching our wedding photo. "I'm sorry," I whispered to his image. "I'm so sorry. You trusted me to raise him right, and I failed. I failed you both." But Daniel's voice seemed to echo in my mind, the way he'd always talked when I doubted myself. "Maggie, you didn't fail. Evil isn't always born. Sometimes it's chosen. You gave him every opportunity to choose good." I thought about my daughters, Sarah and Linda, living across the country. They'd grown distant after marrying and moving away, but they were good women, kind women. They called on holidays, sent cards, lived honest lives. I'd raised them the same as Thomas. The failure wasn't in my mothering, it was in his choosing. By dawn, I'd cried myself empty. I stood at my bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the hollow-eyed woman staring back. My face was swollen, my eyes bloodshot, my hair wild from pulling at it in despair. I looked like a ghost, like someone already dead. But as I stared at my reflection, something shifted. The tears dried. The shaking stopped. The desperate grief transformed into something harder, colder. I thought of my grandchildren, that photo of them at the playground, unaware they were being watched by dangerous men. I thought of other families Thomas might destroy with his gambling. I thought of all the elderly parents who'd end up in Sunset Manor, forgotten and forsaken. "No," I said to my reflection, my voice hoarse but firm. "No more crying. If Thomas wanted to play this game, if he'd chosen to be this person, then I'd show him that his mother, the one he'd dismissed as old and weak, still had some fight left in her." The sun was rising, painting my bedroom walls gold. A new day, the last day I'd spend as a victim. It was time to become something else entirely. I stood in the shower until the water ran cold, letting it wash away the salt of dried tears and the weight of despair. When I stepped out, I wasn't the same woman who'd collapsed on the floor hours earlier. That woman had died sometime in the night, buried under the weight of her son's betrayal. The woman toweling herself dry was someone new, someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. I dressed carefully, choosing Daniel's favorite dress, navy blue with small white flowers. He'd always said it made me look unstoppable. "Like a force of nature, Maggie," he'd say. I needed to be that force now. I put on my mother's pearl necklace, the one Jessica had been eyeing, and my wedding rings. War paint in a way. Armor made of memories of stronger times. In the kitchen, I made myself eat breakfast even though every bite tasted like ash. I needed strength for what was coming. As I sat at my table, the morning sun streaming through the windows, I had a moment of absolute clarity. This wasn't just about saving myself anymore. This was about justice. This was about making sure Thomas never did this to anyone else. This was about protecting my grandchildren from a father who would gamble with their safety. I pulled out a fresh notebook and began to write. Not emotional ramblings this time, but strategy. Clear, calculated planning. The kind I'd done when Daniel died and I'd had to figure out. How to survive on my own with 3 children. First, I needed allies. Patricia's son, Marcus, had already proven helpful, but I needed someone with legal power. My nephew James was a prosecutor in the state attorney's office. He'd know how to handle evidence of elder abuse and attempted murder. My former coworker's daughter worked at Adult Protective Services. The priest at my church had connections throughout the community. I wouldn't fight this battle alone. Second, evidence. What I had was damning, but I needed more. Video proof of their conspiracy, documentation of the medication tampering, financial records showing the unauthorized life insurance policy and Thomas's gambling debts. I needed enough evidence that no one could dismiss this as family drama or the ravings of a confused old woman. Third, protection. They were escalating their plan, and I was in real danger. I couldn't let them know I was onto them while I gathered what I needed. I'd have to perform the greatest acting job of my life, playing the declining, vulnerable mother while building my case against them. I picked up my phone and scrolled to Patricia's number, then hesitated. Once I made this call, there would be no going back. No chance of reconciliation, no possibility that this was all a misunderstanding. I would be declaring war on my own son. But then I thought about Thomas and Jessica laughing in my kitchen about my death, about the tampered medications that could have killed me, about the memory unit at Sunset Manor where they planned to lock me away until I died, confused and alone, about my grandchildren's faces in that threatening photograph. I dialed Patricia's number. "Margaret, it's early. Is everything okay?" "No," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Everything is not okay, but it's going to be. Pat, I need your help, and I need your son's help, and I need you to contact your brother. Isn't he a judge?" "Margaret, you're scaring me. What's going on?" "My son is trying to kill me for my inheritance." The words came out clear and matter-of-fact, like stating the weather. "He and his wife have been poisoning me, and they're planning to have me declared incompetent tomorrow. I have proof, but I need help. Can you come over?" Silence on the other end. Then, "I'm on my way. Don't do anything until I get there. Bring Marcus," I added. "And Pat, be careful. These aren't the people we thought they were." After I hung up, I looked around my kitchen. The scene of so many family dinners, so much laughter, so much love. By the time this was over, those memories would be forever tainted. But that was Thomas's choice, not mine. He destroyed this family the moment he decided I was worth more dead than alive. I walked to Daniel's chair and placed my hand on its worn leather arm. "Give me strength, my love," I whispered. "Help me be the warrior you always said I was." Then I went to my study and began pulling out every document I'd need. The real war was about to begin, and I intended to win. Not just for myself, but for every parent who'd ever been betrayed by the children they'd sacrificed everything to raise. Thomas thought he was dealing with a weak old woman. He was about to learn that Margaret Thompson didn't survive widowhood, poverty, and raising 3 children alone by being weak. Hell hath no fury like a mother scorned, and my fury was just getting started. Patricia arrived within 30 minutes, bringing Marcus and, to my surprise, her brother, Judge William Patterson, still in his golf clothes from an interrupted Sunday morning game. They sat around my dining room table as I laid out everything. The overheard conversation, the forged documents, the tampered medications, the gambling debts, the threats against my grandchildren. William's face grew darker with each revelation. "This is attempted murder, Margaret," he said quietly. "Fraud, elder abuse, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit murder. Your son is looking at 20 to life if we do this right." "I don't want him just arrested," I said, my voice steel. "I want him exposed. I want everyone to know what kind of man he really is. And I want to protect my grandchildren from their father." William nodded slowly. "Then we need to be smart about this. One wrong move and they'll know you're onto them. They could destroy evidence, or worse, accelerate their plan." Marcus pulled out his laptop. "I've already set up surveillance software on Mrs. Thompson's devices that they can't detect. Everything they see will be recorded. But we need more. We need them on video admitting to everything." "The appointment tomorrow," I said suddenly, "at Sunset Manor. They'll come here first to take me. That's our opportunity." Patricia leaned forward. "You want to let them take you to that place?" "No, I want them to try." I turned to Marcus. "Can you set up cameras in my house today? Hidden ones?" "Already have the equipment in my car," he said with a grim smile. "Had a feeling we'd need it." While Marcus installed tiny cameras in the living room, kitchen, and study, William made calls to the state attorney's office. "I need a rush on some warrants," I heard him say. "And get Detective Morrison. Yes, I know it's Sunday. This is urgent." Patricia helped me prepare my performance. We practiced what I would say, how I would act. Confused, but not too confused. Resistant, but not too resistant. I needed to draw out their confession without raising suspicion. "When they come tomorrow, I'll refuse to go at first," I explained. "Say I don't understand why I need to leave my home. That should frustrate them into explaining their plan, maybe even admitting to the medication tampering." But the masterstroke came from Marcus. "Mrs. Thompson, what if we involve your daughters? If Thomas thinks they're coming to visit, he'll panic. He'll need to move fast before they can interfere." I called Sarah in California. The conversation was painful, explaining her brother's betrayal, hearing her gasp and cry. But she was strong, like her mother. "I'll fly out tonight," she said. "And Mom, I'm so sorry we haven't been there. We thought Thomas was taking care of you." "He was," I said bitterly, "just not the way you thought." Linda's reaction was pure rage. "I'm going to kill him," she snarled from Seattle. "That bastard, that absolute bastard." "No," I said firmly. "We're going to do this legally. We're going to destroy him the right way." By evening, everything was in place. Cameras hidden throughout the house. My real medications secured in a safety deposit box Patricia would access if needed. A recording app on my phone that would capture everything while appearing to be turned off. Marcus had even created a fake email from Sunset Manor confirming my admission for tomorrow, which Thomas would see through the keylogger. Detective Morrison arrived at 8, a tall, serious woman who took notes as I walked her through everything. "Mrs. Thompson, this is dangerous. We should arrest them now." "No," I insisted. "They'll deny everything. Say it was a misunderstanding. Thomas is respected in this community. We need ironclad proof." She reluctantly agreed but insisted on having units nearby during tomorrow's confrontation. First sign of physical danger. We're coming in. That night, I sat alone in my house, knowing it was the last evening before everything changed. I walked through each room, touching memories, the door frame where we'd marked the children's heights, the wall where Thomas's diplomas hung, the kitchen where Jessica and I had baked cookies with the grandchildren last Christmas. I stopped at Thomas's high school graduation photo. "You did this," I whispered to his smiling young face. "You chose this path, and now you'll face the consequences." At exactly 2 a.m., following the script we'd prepared, I called my lawyer, William's colleague who was in on the plan. He arrived with a briefcase and official-looking documents, making sure his car was visible from the street. Thomas and Jessica would see it through their surveillance. They'd know something was happening. they'd panic, and panicked people make mistakes. I placed a sealed envelope on the kitchen table where Thomas would find it tomorrow. Inside was a new will, dated today, completely legal and binding. But he wouldn't know what it said until he opened it. The suspense would drive him crazy, maybe crazy enough to confess everything. As dawn approached, I was ready. Every piece in place, every ally positioned, every trap set. Thomas thought he was coming to collect a helpless old woman tomorrow. Instead, he was walking into his own doom. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling, as if the weather itself knew what was coming. I sat at my kitchen table at 7 a.m., watching the rain streak down the windows, the sealed envelope positioned perfectly in the center of the table. My hands were steady as I sipped my tea. The cameras were rolling. Detective Morrison and her team were positioned 2 blocks away. Sarah and Linda were at Patricia's house, waiting for my signal. At 8:47 a.m., Thomas's BMW pulled into the driveway, followed by Jessica's Mercedes. They were early. The Sunset Manor appointment wasn't until 2 p.m. They wanted to catch me off guard, probably planning to convince me this was just a doctor's visit or a tour of a nice place. I heard them using their key to enter. No knock, no announcement. Just the sound of footsteps in my foyer like they already owned the place. "Mom," Thomas called out, his voice carrying that false concern I now recognized so well. "Mom, where are you?" "In the kitchen," I replied, not moving from my chair. They appeared in the doorway together, dressed professionally. Thomas in his doctor's coat, as if that gave him authority. Jessica in a conservative blue suit that made her look trustworthy. They'd chosen their costumes carefully. Thomas's eyes went immediately to the envelope on the table. I saw him freeze, saw the color drain from his face. "What's that?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Something for you," I said simply. "But first, why don't you tell me why you're here? It's awfully early for a social visit." Jessica stepped forward, her smile so false it could have been painted on. "Margaret, we're worried about you. You've been forgetting things, seeming confused. We've made an appointment with a specialist who can help." "I haven't forgotten anything," I said calmly. "My memory is perfectly fine." "Mom," Thomas said, moving closer, "last week you called me 3 times asking the same question. You forgot Emma's birthday. You left the stove on all night." All lies. Such easy lies from his lips. "That's not true, Thomas, and you know it." His jaw tightened. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. You're becoming paranoid, aggressive, classic signs of dementia." "Is that your professional diagnosis, doctor?" I asked. "Or is that just what you need people to believe?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Jessica and Thomas exchanged glances. "We're trying to help you," Jessica said, her voice harder now. "Sunset Manor is a beautiful facility. You'll have care around the clock, activities, people your own age." "A memory unit," I interrupted. "You specifically requested the memory unit. For someone whose memory is supposedly failing, I remember that quite clearly from the conversation I overheard Saturday night." The silence was deafening. Thomas's hand moved toward the envelope, then pulled back. "You were listening." Jessica's voice was sharp, accusatory. "In my own home? Yes, I heard everything. The gambling debts, the $300,000, Vincent Caruso, the threats against my grandchildren." I kept my voice level, matter of fact. "I heard you planning my death." Thomas tried to recover. "Mom, you're confused. You're mixing up things you've seen on TV with reality. This is exactly why—" "The medications in my cabinet aren't my prescriptions," I continued. "They're triple the dose, enough to cause confusion, dizziness, maybe even a fatal overdose if given enough time. The pharmacy confirmed it yesterday." Jessica stepped back toward the door, but I wasn't finished. "The forged power of attorney documents in the basement, the life insurance policy you took out without my knowledge, the house sale contract you've been negotiating. Should I continue?" Thomas's mask finally slipped. His face contorted with rage, making him look like someone I'd never seen before. You stupid old woman, you have no idea what you're dealing with. Thomas, Jessica hissed, grabbing his arm, but he shook her off, advancing toward me. Do you know what they'll do to Emma and Michael and Sophie if I don't pay? Do you know what those monsters are capable of? So your solution was to murder me? You're 72, he exploded. You've lived your life. My children haven't. Jessica hasn't. I haven't. Why should you get to sit in this house with all this money while we lose everything? There it was, the confession. The cameras were catching every word. Because it's mine, I said quietly. Because I earned it. Because your father and I built this life with our bare hands, and because being old doesn't mean I deserve to die. Thomas lunged for the envelope, snatching it off the table. His hand shook as he tore it open. Jessica peered over his shoulder. I watched their faces as they read the contents of my new will. The room was silent except for the sound of rain against the windows and Thomas's increasingly ragged breathing as he read. Jessica's perfectly made-up face crumbled. No, Thomas whispered. No, you can't do this. It's already done, I said. He looked up at me, and for just a moment I saw my little boy in his eyes, scared, desperate, realizing he'd done something that couldn't be taken back. Then the moment passed, and the monster returned. You're going to change this, he said, his voice deadly quiet. You're going to change this right now, or I swear to God. That's when the doorbell rang. The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time. Thomas and Jessica froze, their faces shifting from rage to confusion. Through the kitchen window, I could see Patricia's car in the driveway, along with several others they wouldn't recognize. Are you expecting someone? Jessica asked, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. As a matter of fact, I am. I stood up slowly, smoothing my dress. My daughters are here. You remember Sarah and Linda, don't you, Thomas? Your sisters. The color drained from his face entirely. They live across the country. They flew in last night. Amazing what family will do when they learn someone's in danger. I moved toward the front door, but Thomas grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. Don't you dare, he hissed. Let go of me, son. The word son tasted bitter now. Or would you like to add assault to your list of crimes? The door opened without my reaching it. Sarah stood there, using her spare key, with Linda right behind her. But they weren't alone. Detective Morrison was with them, along with 2 uniformed officers. Behind them stood Patricia, Marcus with a laptop, and, this was my own addition to the plan, Dr. Morrison, my physician of 20 years. Hello, Thomas, Sarah said coldly. Jessica, I hear you've been taking care of our mother. Thomas released my arm, stepping back. Sarah, Linda, this isn't what it looks like. Mom's been confused. Save it, Linda snapped. We know everything. Detective Morrison stepped forward, her badge visible. Dr. Thompson, Mrs. Thompson, I'm going to need you both to step into the living room. We have some questions. This is ridiculous, Jessica shrieked. We're trying to help her. She's sick. Dr. Morrison entered then, his presence commanding respect. Actually, I examined Margaret yesterday at her request. Full cognitive assessment, blood work, everything. She's in remarkable health for her age, and her mental faculties are completely intact. In fact, I found evidence of medication tampering that could have been fatal. Thomas tried one last time. She's my mother. We were just concerned. Concerned enough to take out a life insurance policy without her knowledge? Detective Morrison asked. Concerned enough to forge power of attorney documents? Concerned enough to contact Sunset Manor about their memory unit? Marcus opened his laptop, and suddenly the kitchen surveillance video was playing. Everyone could hear Thomas's voice clear as day. You're 72! You've lived your life! Followed by his admission about the gambling debts, the threats against the children. But the real twist came when I spoke up. Thomas, would you like to know what the will says? He was trembling now, the envelope crumpled in his fist. It says you're leaving everything to charity, Nothing for your family. Read it again, I said softly. Read it more carefully. With shaking hands, he smoothed out the paper. Jessica read over his shoulder, and I watched her face change as she understood. You're leaving everything to Sarah and Linda as trustees, she read aloud, to be administered for the exclusive benefit of Emma, Michael, and Sophie Thompson, to be used solely for their education, healthcare, and welfare, protected from any access by their parents. You're protecting my children. From me? Thomas's voice broke. I'm protecting them from Vincent Caruso and whatever other criminals you owe money to, I corrected. The trust is ironclad. Your creditors can't touch it. Neither can you. But your children will be provided for, their futures secured, despite their father's choices. Thomas sank into a kitchen chair, his head in his hands. The deadline is next week. They'll kill me. No, Detective Morrison said, they won't. Because you're going to cooperate with our investigation into their illegal gambling operations in exchange for protection and a reduced sentence on your charges. What charges? Jessica screamed. We didn't do anything. Marcus turned the laptop toward her. Actually, we have everything. The keylogger you installed on her computer? It recorded every crime you planned. The pharmacy verified the medication tampering. The bank confirmed the fraudulent accounts. The forged documents have your fingerprints all over them. Sarah stepped forward, tears streaming down her face, but her voice steady. The saddest part, Thomas, is that if you'd just asked for help, if you'd been honest, we would have figured something out. Mom would have helped you. We all would have. But you chose this instead, Linda added. You chose to betray the woman who sacrificed everything for you. The officers moved forward. Thomas Thompson, Jessica Thompson, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder. Elder, abuse, fraud, and identity theft. You have the right to remain silent. As they were handcuffed, Thomas looked at me one last time. Mom, please, the children. The children will be fine, I said firmly. Sarah and Linda will make sure of that while you're in prison. And when they're old enough, they'll know the truth about what their parents tried to do. But they'll also know that their grandmother loved them enough to protect them, even from you. Jessica was sobbing now, mascara running down her cheeks, her perfect facade finally shattered. This is all your fault, she screamed at Thomas. Your gambling, your debts, your idea. As they were led away, neighbors had gathered on the lawn, drawn by the police cars. Mrs. Chen was there, Mr. and Mrs. Patterson, the Johnsons from across the street. They'd all see Thomas and Jessica arrested, their reputation destroyed, their crime exposed. The last thing Thomas said before they put him in the police car was, I'm sorry. But sorry wasn't enough. Not this time. 6 months later, I stood in my garden, tending to roses that had never bloomed better. The morning sun was gentle, and the cardinals had returned to nest in the oak tree. My hands, steady and sure, pruned the dead blooms to make room for new growth. It was metaphorical, really, cutting away the rot so life could flourish. Thomas was serving 12 years in federal prison. His cooperation with the FBI's investigation into Vincent Caruso's gambling ring had reduced his sentence from the possible 25 to life. Jessica got 8 years. Their beautiful house in the suburbs had been sold to pay restitution and settle some of the gambling debts. The rest would have to wait. The children were living with Sarah now. She'd taken a leave from her job in California and moved back home with her husband. They'd rented a house just 3 streets over from mine. Every afternoon, Sophie would run through my back door, pigtails flying, shouting, Grandma Maggie, just like before. Except now, her hugs lasted longer, as if she was afraid I might disappear. Michael had stopped asking when Daddy was coming home. Emma, old enough to understand more than we'd like, had started seeing a therapist. Last week, she'd asked me, Grandma, why did Daddy try to hurt you? I'd held her close and told her the only truth I could. Sometimes, people lose their way, sweetheart. But that doesn't mean we stop loving who they used to be. The house felt different now. Lighter, somehow, despite everything that had happened. I'd removed Thomas's photos from the walls but kept them in an album. Someday, when the children were older, they might want them, or they might not. That would be their choice. Linda visited monthly from Seattle, and our relationship had transformed. The distance that had grown between us melted away in the fire of crisis. Last visit, she'd helped me convert Thomas's old room into a craft studio. "You need something just for you, Mom," she'd said. And she was right. I'd joined a support group for elderly victims of family exploitation. Turns out, my story wasn't as unique as I'd thought. Every Tuesday evening, 8 of us gathered in the church basement, sharing our stories, our pain, our recovery. Mrs. Davidson's daughter had drained her retirement account. Mr. Felix's son had tried to have him declared incompetent. We were all casualties of greed, but we were surviving. Patricia and I had grown even closer. She came for tea every Thursday, and we'd sit on the porch, not talking about Thomas, not talking about the trial, just being present in the moment. Her friendship had saved me in ways I couldn't fully express. The money was secure now, protected in trusts that would see my grandchildren through college and beyond. I'd also set aside funds for therapy. They'd need it, growing up with the knowledge of what their parents had done. But I'd made sure they'd also grow up knowing they were loved, fiercely and unconditionally, by the family that remained. I'd received one letter from Thomas, forwarded through his lawyer. I'd read it once, then burned it in the fireplace. He'd written about his regret, his shame, how prison had opened his eyes, how the gambling had started small, just friendly poker games with other doctors, then spiraled out of control. How he'd been so desperate he'd convinced himself I wouldn't mind dying, that I'd want to help him one last time. But explanations weren't excuses. Understanding why someone hurt you doesn't obligate you to forgive them. Dr. Morrison had become more attentive to my health, insisting on monthly checkups. "You've been through trauma, Margaret. We need to monitor your heart." But my heart, broken as it was by betrayal, kept beating steadily. Turns out I was stronger than anyone, including myself, had imagined. Last week I'd gone to visit Daniel's grave, something I hadn't done since before the crisis. I'd told him everything, speaking to the headstone as if he could hear me. "I protected them, Danny. The children are safe. Thomas is facing consequences. I did what I had to do." The wind had rustled through the cemetery trees, and for just a moment, I could have sworn I heard his voice. "That's my Maggie, my force of nature." Today, as I watered the roses, Sophie came running into the garden. "Grandma, look what I made at school." She held up a painted handprint on construction paper, just like her father had made all those years ago, but hers said, "I love you forever, Grandma." "It's beautiful, sweetheart," I said, pulling her into my arms. "Mommy Sarah says we're having Sunday dinner here this week. Can we make the special rolls?" "Of course we can." As she ran off to play, I stood in my garden, surrounded by beauty that had survived the harsh winter. The house was still standing. The family, restructured but not destroyed, continued on. And I was still, here, still myself, still whole despite someone's attempt to break me. I'd won. Not because Thomas and Jessica were in prison, but because I'd refused to let their betrayal define my remaining years. I'd refused to become the victim they'd tried to make me. The sun was warm on my face, and somewhere in the distance I could hear children laughing. Life, real life, was still happening, and I was still very much a part of it. The seasons changed, as they always do, and on a crisp autumn afternoon, exactly 1 year after that terrible night, I found myself sitting on my porch with all 3 grandchildren. Emma was teaching Sophie to knit, badly, but with patience that reminded me of myself at her age. Michael was reading a book, occasionally looking up to ask me what certain words meant. These quiet moments had become precious beyond measure. "Grandma," Emma said suddenly, her needles pausing, "do you think bad people can become good again?" I considered my answer carefully. These children carried enough burden without my adding to it with false hope or crushing cynicism. I think, I said slowly, that people always have the choice to do better tomorrow than they did today. But becoming good again requires more than just wanting it. It requires accepting responsibility, making amends where possible, and understanding that some things can't be undone. Like Dad? Michael asked quietly, still looking at his book. Like your dad, yes. Sophie climbed into my lap, her small arms wrapping around my neck. But we're good, right, Grandma? You're wonderful, I assured her, kissing the top of her head. And you always will be, as long as you remember that love means protecting people, not hurting them. Sarah appeared in the doorway with tea and cookies. She'd aged these past months, carrying the weight of her brother's betrayal and sudden motherhood to his children. But she'd also grown stronger, fiercer. She'd become the daughter I'd always known she could be. Kids, why don't you take the cookies inside and pick a movie? She suggested. They scampered off, leaving us alone. Sarah sat beside me, taking my hand. The prosecutor called. Thomas wants to see the children. What did you tell them? That it would be their choice when they're older. Not his. Not now. I squeezed her hand. You're doing the right thing. Am I? Sometimes I wonder if I'm being too harsh. Protecting children from harm is never too harsh, even when the harm comes from their own parents. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the garden. The roses had finished their second bloom, but the chrysanthemums were just beginning, proof that endings and beginnings could coexist. Here's what I've learned through all of this. Family isn't just about blood. It's about choice. Every day we choose whether to love or betray, to protect or exploit, to build up or tear down. Thomas and Jessica made their choices, and now they're living with the consequences. But the rest of us? We chose to rebuild, to love despite the pain, to create something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal. The saddest part of this story isn't what Thomas tried to do to me, it's what he did to himself. He had everything: a loving family, a successful career, beautiful children, a mother who would have moved heaven and earth for him. But greed is a poison that makes you blind to your blessings. And by the time he realized what he'd lost, it was too late. I think about the other families out there, the other elderly parents who might be facing the same betrayal. The signs are often subtle. Sudden interest in finances, unexpected visits, pressure to sign documents, mysterious illness that doctors can't explain. If you see these signs, don't do what I did. Don't explain them away. Don't let love make you blind. Seek help immediately. But I also think about forgiveness. Not the kind that excuses or forgets, but the kind that frees you from carrying poison in your own heart. I may never forgive Thomas for what he tried to do to me, but I've forgiven myself for not seeing it sooner. I've forgiven myself for raising a son capable of such cruelty. That wasn't my failure. It was his choice. As darkness settled over my neighborhood, I stood to go inside. My house, once a potential crime scene, had become a sanctuary again. The grandchildren's laughter echoed from the living room. Sarah was making dinner in the kitchen where Thomas had planned my demise. Life had reclaimed this space, stronger for having survived the storm. Before I closed the door, I looked up at the first stars appearing in the evening sky. Somewhere out there, Daniel was watching. I'd kept my promise to him. I'd protected our family, even from itself. What would you do if you discovered your own family was plotting against you? Would you have the strength to fight back? Would you choose justice over blood? Would you be able to rebuild your life after such betrayal? I'd like to think that most of you will never have to answer these questions. But if you do, remember this: you are stronger than you know. You deserve respect and safety, regardless of your age. And sometimes, the greatest act of love is refusing to enable those who would destroy themselves and everyone around them. Your life has value beyond what you can give others. Your story doesn't end when someone else decides it should. Mine didn't, and neither should yours.